Hey guys, Modern Ham here, KN4MKB. This is more of a vlog, kind of news post, and I just want to talk a little bit about current events without getting political. And we're going to be talking about the FCC notice DA2173 in response to the amateur radio use or the ham radio use in the protests in the Capitol at the current time. So unless you live under a rock, you've seen a lot of stuff going on right now, maybe even the radio community, about people using ham radio in protests that are going on in capitals for inauguration and that type of deal. So I just wanted to talk about those a little bit and show you guys the notice that the FCC came out with, and talk a little bit about some articles from some big news sources like CNN that have come out too, just so everybody's kind of in tune with what's going on in the radio world. So so the first thing we're going to take a look at here is the public notice by the FCC DA 21-73 that was released January 17th, 2021. The FCC Enforcement Advisory. Warning, and I'm just going to read this off to you guys too in case you haven't read it. Amateur and personnel radio services licensed and operators may not use radio equipment to commit or facilitate criminal acts. Obviously. The Enforcement Bureau of the Federal Communications Commission issues the enforcement advisory to remind licensees in the amateur radio service, as well as licensees and operators in the personal radio services, that the Commission prohibits the use of radios in those services to commit or facilitate criminal acts. The Bureau has become aware of discussions on social media platforms suggesting that certain radio services regulated by the Commission may be an alternative to social media platforms to groups to communicate and coordinate future activities. The Bureau recognizes that these services can be used for a wide range of permitted purposes, including speech that is protected under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Amateur and personal radio services, however, may not be used to commit or facilitate crimes. Specifically, the Bureau reminds amateur licensees that they are prohibited from transmitting communications intended to facilitate a criminal act or messages encoding for the purpose of obscuring their meaning. Likewise, individuals operating radios in the personal radio services, a category that includes citizens band radios, family radio service, walkie-talkies, and general mobile radio services, are prohibited from using these radios in connection with any activity that is against federal, state, or local law. Individuals using radios in amateur or personal radio services in this manner may be subject to severe penalties, including significant fines, seizure of the offending equipment, and in some cases, criminal prosecution. So there's not much to unpack here. What they're basically doing is they're issuing a statement in response to some news articles and other things that have been coming out, saying that they're with the protesters here that are in the Capitol. There's rumor that instead of using social media where they're being banned from, now they're using radio service. Now, in my personal opinion, I think that's a ridiculous idea, because they're not going to go straight from social media over to radio. They have a lot of different means of communication, whether it be phone, text, phone call, any of the thousands of messenger services available on the App Store, creating other social media profiles. So I think one big thing that sparked this was, let's say, there was probably a post or two that spread the rumor, and now we have big media companies on it because that's a really interesting article, right? So let's take a look at one in particular by CNN. And this is, I think, one of the big roots of why they maybe put out this notice. Actually, this was actually put out beforehand, so I retract that statement. But it says, blocked from social media, extremists discuss trying to turning to radios to plan attacks, FCC warns. So CNN here is trying to imply that because these individuals were blocked from social media, now they're using radio. I don't think that would be the reason that they're using radio. They're probably using radio because it's just a lot easier to voice contact somebody over radio if you're already in a close vicinity. So it's kind of a clickbaity article. It's really just trying to get people to check in on it. And what I do worry about is the effect that this might have on the amateur radio community. Because if this is the picture that we're painting, so that the FCC had to release a statement, and the ARRL, which we'll see in just a moment, it kind of worries me a little bit, and I hope that this doesn't turn into an issue down the road. but I do foresee if they really want to piggyback on this, this could be a source of news for a little while. I just think it's really important that people are aware of what's going on, especially if you're involved in the amateur radio community, to just make sure that you're aware of what the public image is and how it's being affected by the current events and by these statements. So the ARRL also issued a statement, and for them it says for over 100 years amateur radio have stood for the development of science and art for communications, public service, and enhancement of international goodwill. Amateur radio's long history and service to the public has solidified the well-earned reputation that amateur radio saves lives. Amateur radio operators, due to their history of public service, their training, and the requirement that they be licensed by the FCC, have earned their status as a component of critical communications infrastructure as a reliable resource when all else fails. Amateur radio is about the development of communications and responsible public service. Its misuse is inconsistent with the history of service. ARRL does not support its misuse for purposes inconsistent with these values and purposes. So let's unpack this a little bit and kind of understand why all this is coming out now. So obviously, I think the CNN article was more so, okay, they have a story and they're going to push that story. And that, that's one thing. So the ARRL, they have to come out and make a statement because on behalf of the amateur radio users to show the big wigs and the FCC and all these guys that they do take a stand against it. And I think that's probably a good move in their favor. So they're just re-solidifying, hey, as amateur radio operators, that's not what we stand for. And I think that's a good move to make. So the FCC, in my opinion here, I think they're preparing for something. And I think that's probably like convictions of criminals. So if you're in the radio community, you know that there's been a long kind of running joke about the FCC doesn't really enforce a lot of the rules and regulations going on in the amateur radio bands. There's some jamming over the repeaters daily that goes on for years and it's not really dealt with. And so whenever there is something that they do need to deal with or punish somebody for, I think it's necessary for them to come out and kind of lay it out in front of everybody and say, hey, this is wrong and you could be prosecuted for it. And that way, when these individuals that are doing this, when they're convicted of crimes, if they've been recorded or whatever it be, they can come back and make sure that they can use this as evidence and say, hey, we are enforcing the rules. And that way there's not really an argument against that. So I think that's the FCC kind of just covering their back and getting ready for maybe some legal battles that's going to be coming up ahead. There's been a lot of pictures circulating too with the protesters at the Capitol and different places. And they have Baofeng radios and this and that attached to them. And that's been going on for a while. During these big events and these rallies and the protests and the riots, the Baofeng radio has been very, very common in these photos. And they've been used quite a bit, especially with the kind of blurred lines that's been going on for the past few years about if they're illegal on this or illegal on that. And that's something I've definitely hammered a lot on my channel. And I'm kind of like I draw a line in the sand. They're illegal to use if you don't have a license. And other people are going to argue with me just because the FCC doesn't enforce it. I still stand my ground. If you don't have a ham radio license, I don't care what frequency you use. I don't care if it's FRS or GMRS or whatever it be. They're illegal to use. And so I think this right here may be the pushing point for the FCC to draw a line here and actually maybe take a stance on the issues that's been going on and the blurred lines that's been going on for the past 5 years or so with the addition of these Baofengs and cheap Chinese radios into the market. So out of this, hopefully, if we see any type of change come out of this, if there are some type of new rules and regulations or anything being enforced, hopefully it's in the amateur radio community's favor. But I do think that everybody watching this, if you enjoy ham radio and you're involved in the hobby, you need to keep an eye on this and just hope that it doesn't come out bad for us. Anyways, this is just a video just to kind of push this out there, just in case you live under a rock and you haven't seen it. Let me know what you guys think down below in the description. do. I love a good discussion. So if you guys have any feedback or you disagree with me somewhere, make sure to let me know. And make sure you subscribe to the channel. Anyways, 73 to you.